window Shadowbox table. The heart of this project is an old 4-pane window. I started off by removing all the hardware, including the hinges. The next step was to run it through my table saw to clean up the edges where the hinges were recessed. Everything will be sized to this window. I used old plywood shelves to make the Shadowbox part of this table. I trimmed them to size, glued and tacked them in place with brads before coming back to countersink some screws. The bottom panel is made up of several pieces of plywood. I drilled pocket holes to join those pieces together. This may not be the best method of doing this, and I would have rather had a solid plywood bottom, but working with reclaimed stuff, you kind of got to take what you get. I joined the bottom panel to the rest of the box using more pocket holes and screws. With a window on the box, you can begin to see what this will look like when it's done. The next step was to divide the box to match the window panes. I wanted 4 boxes here. I sized a couple plywood strips to fit, then set up my table saw to create half-lap joints in the middle. Those interlocked at the center there and got fastened in place with more glue and screws. What I want to do is use these reclaimed door hinges that I picked up at the salvage place. I'm going to put them about right here. I've got enough width on the window frame that shouldn't be a problem, but on the inside of the box that I made, I need a little bit more meat for these to screw into. So I've cut a couple pieces of scrap 2x4. They are the right length this way, but I need to shave them down a little bit and screw them in here. That'll give me plenty of extra wood to attach these hinges to. Next step was to position the hinges, and I cut a mortise for them freehand with my small router. Placing the hinges on the window was a little more tricky. I used some super glue, then got them positioned exactly where I wanted them, weighted down the window with a couple weights, and gave it a couple minutes to dry. Then I could come back and remove the hinge pins so I could locate the top half of the hinges and cut in the mortises. I used some pieces of painted door casing next. The depth of the Shadowbox was sized to these pieces, and I trimmed off a strip that I'll attach to the window while the rest will get tacked to the box. Then it was time to measure and miter and glue and brad. And then spent a minute trying to find my pencil because I didn't realize I had it in my mouth the whole time. Then measure and miter, glue and brad the rest of the upper trim. The back piece of trim needed a mortise so it would fit around the hinges. I cut the bottom pieces, buttered them up with plenty of glue, and tacked them into place as well. Here's where a little planning would have helped out. With the addition of the trim, the hinges are essentially recessed at this point. That made the top want to bind up when I tried to open it. After much savagery with a chamfering bit and this cheapo plane, I was able to get a decent angle on this, and now I know that when I put this piece in place, the top will still swing open. I sanded off the loose paint and eased the edges, then I hit it with a clear coat of polyurethane. Now on to the legs. I cut the tongues and groove off some old pieces of floorboards. Then I cut down some a little more narrow so that when the leg pieces come together, they'll be well balanced. There'll be two pieces that make up each leg. I cleaned up one face of this wood using my router-based flattening jig. I made a video about that project. I could have also cleaned these up with a belt sander. I wanted to taper the legs just a little bit, so I tacked together a quick tapering jig. Because these pieces are rather small, I screwed on some hold downs to keep my hands clear of the blade when I'm making the cuts. This jig allows a piece of wood to sit at an angle to the blade with the back of the jig riding square along the fence. It makes quick, repeatable cuts. Because some of them were more narrow, I used a spacer to make sure the cuts would stay consistent. I glued and tacked the leg pieces together with brads, then went back in and put a glue block down the center of the leg for a little extra support. You can see with them standing up, the two halves that make up each leg come together to be balanced out. More scrap 2x4s to make an apron for the underside of the tabletop so I had a place to attach the legs. For these, I used a Forstner bit to recess the screws. Then I filled those screw holes with oak plugs. Those were obviously not reclaimed, but the drawer pull that I used as a handle on the top was. Here it is all together, and I think it turned out pretty well. Now to a few words on why I made this project. There's a place in Cincinnati called Building Value. It's operated by Easter Seals, and they hire people to reclaim building materials out of old buildings. It helps put people to work, and it helps keep all that stuff out of the landfill. I made this project for their spring fundraiser. Actually, almost everything that came from this project came from Building Value. They then auctioned off this piece to help raise money. If you're into working with reclaimed, it's worth looking for a place near you that salvages reclaimed building materials. There are a lot of them all across the country. The window was really the inspiration for this project. It all flowed from there. If you've got an idea for a project you could make with an old window, I'd like to hear about it down in the comments below. Take a second to share your ideas, share your skills. I think as people who like to make things, the most important thing we can make is more makers. See you next time.